All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm Tim Siglin. I'm the media strategy principal at ReelSolver Incorporated and also a contributing editor for streaming media. Joel Unico came up to me just before this and gave me my 20-year pin, which means I guess I've been in the industry for 20 years, which seems sort of scary. But today we're going to be talking about securing the live stream, and what we're going to do first is I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and I know you have some slides, Peter, so let me jump over to yours. Whoops. 20 years in the industry, still can't run PowerPoint.
Well, yeah, so hi everyone. As you can see, I'm Pieter-Jan Speelmans. I actually work at THEOplayer as CTO. I have a number of principles which I try to run by. One being performance, because I have an engineering background. Another one being quality, and then another one being making things simple. And that's actually what we try to do with our product as well, THEOplayer. We're an HTML5 based player originally, but doing so much more these days. Focusing on high quality user experiences, but also, of course, integrating with the rest of the ecosystem, including DRM and other security protection systems, of course.
Good. All right, Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Grizzle. I'm the senior sales engineer or solution engineer for IBM Cloud Video. I've been in the industry about 20 years, with the emphasis more on production than merged into engineering, things like that. The next slide. So I actually work with IBM Cloud Video, which are the OTT streaming, or OTT and live streaming, along with IBM Watson. So I support customers on developing their needs for the variety of things we offer.
And we did an interview just a few minutes ago in the Almost Live booth where you're talking about how machine learning for Watson is actually helping in a lot
Correct.
of these things.
Content enrichment with metadata fulfillment and putting things on there, manipulation to make things more standard and allow things to connect very, very easy to all devices.
Good. All right. Anil?
Hi, I didn't do slides. I'm going to try and captivate you with just my talking. So my name is Anil Jain. I am the Executive Vice President and General Manager for media at Brightcove, which means I'm responsible for our global media business. This must be my 5th or 6th streaming media west. I'm not sure. Not quite at the 20-year mark, but at CES they did give me a veteran badge at one point. So we're all getting older. But with respect to what we do at Brightcove, many of you may be familiar. We are one of the leading online video platforms. With respect to the live streaming summit, something we're particularly excited about is we've just launched our brand new live streaming architecture and solution, Brightcove Live. We're seeing a real uptick in interest and demand for live streaming, and it's been pretty hot this year. A lot of great kind of case studies to reference. So happy to talk to you guys more about that.
Good. Jim?
Hi. Oops. Seems a little loud. Hey, I'm Jim Denenny with Concurrent. I didn't do slides either. I lead the R&D organization at Concurrent. I too should have a 20-year badge, maybe a little bit longer than that. I spent my first 10 years really in heavy streaming at Real Networks, doing a number of things on internet streaming and mobile streaming. Last thing I did there was led the platform as a service group for a number of the tier 1 mobile operators in the US.
And you now have a 20-year badge.
Oh, excellent. Got a prize. About 10 years ago, I decided to switch over and join the pay TV part of the video industry. So that's what Concurrent really does. Concurrent started by building a video on-demand system for cable operators. That's evolved into a full end-to-end software-based CDN solution. So we do everything from transcoding, transforming content, storing content, protecting it, and delivering it for cable operators, telcos, and more extending into the full video chain back up to the broadcasters.
Nice. Okay. So I'm going to start with you, Jim. We can work our way back across. Why do we need to secure live streams? What are some of the reasons the industry gives us for securing live streams?
So, coming from the space that I come from, our customers are contractually obligated to protect those streams. So they've got agreements to distribute content, and sometimes they're overly strict. So we have requirements for protecting, sometimes in storage, in transit, the content itself being encrypted to protect it during decoding. We don't get to the display part of it. We stop right before that. But it's really the agreements that our customers have with providers to protect their crown jewels.
Okay, so those are licensing issues. Okay.
Yep.
All right, Anil?
Yeah, so I mean, the same is true in VOD, right? That a lot of the customers we deal with, a lot of media organizations, whether they're broadcasters, OTT services, publishers, if they have licensed content, in particular content, from studios, and this is true with a lot of our international OTT services and broadcast customers, they have those contractual obligations, and they're kind of at the mercy of those licensing requirements. I think we're all kind of familiar with that. The other thing that's particularly interesting around protecting live streams is recognizing that the importance of live, right? So live is the only remaining true appointment television that's out there. There are the media companies around the world that are struggling with kind of proving the ROI of digital in general, right? Have recognized there's an opportunity as costs have come down to unlock revenue from live events, and what matters most, right, is how exclusive is that content.
Sure.
So very recently we powered pay-per-view live streaming for certain popular fights that happened this summer, right? And those 2-hour events translated to millions of dollars of digital revenue for the provider that had the rights in a particular region of the world, and they really cared a lot about securing that content. And we can talk further about how viable that is in the end, but
Sure.
That's one of the reasons.
Well, and interestingly, the problems with some of those big events aren't necessarily the secured stream, it's the authentication to get in to see the stream to begin with, which to me was sort of intriguing that we still have a gatekeeping problem that has nothing to do with securing the stream.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally what it comes down to, and this is true for the motivation for the studios as well, right, is they have an investment either in the content production and then the revenue associated with licensing the rights,
right.
Or you're a licensee and you've spent a lot of money to secure those rights. And you want to do whatever you can to keep that exclusivity. I think one of the debates that continues, right, is how much protection is enough protection, of the content, what security is actually really secure, and to what extent is your content actually being stolen, right? And what are you doing about it? What's your willingness to actually enforce that security?
Sure. Scott, anything to add? And especially, I know IBM does work with enterprise as well.
Correct.
Are there reasons to secure streams in the enterprise space?
A lot of reasons. Trade secrets and corporate information. You want to talk to your employees and not have your competitors get the information. So we have a lot of customers who need that security. So when it's private, only authorized viewers can watch it. The worst case to happen is, someone has a simple password on and the system and they brute force, and now your competitor has all your deep, darkest secrets at their fingertips. So we have a lot of customers who are, they need to have, multi-factor authentication to get in, and things like that. We also have customers, and again, like they mentioned, they have contractual obligations. They have to have that because they're doing TV shows. They're doing music, and they have to have the rights and different things out there, and they want to make sure they're not getting pirated and being distributed or downloaded.
Okay, makes sense. And then you kind of play across multiple market verticals.
We see it across the board as well. Same with people just having the contracts, people within the companies as well who just want to know that their stream is not getting stolen. Another interesting thing that we see though is that it's not per se just from a contractual point of view making sure that the content is safe for the media rights owner, but also the guys licensing it, that they have some form of certainty that within their region, they can distribute it, and they will be the only ones who will be able to do it, because the other guys who are buying the rights in different regions, they're obliged as well to restrict access to those streams to their regions as well. So it means that if you really buy those rights, that you are certain as well that the other people won't be able to stream in your region as well. So it's a mix of different use cases that we see, but.
And at what point is it, I mean, you sort of focus on the player, but as you said, you're moving up the value chain, the supply chain. At what point is it the responsibility of the end player companies versus, say, the CDNs to look at deciding how to secure the streams from a rights standpoint when you're talking multiple regions, especially places like Europe and Asia?
Well, our approach basically is to integrate with all the other companies who are, because we're player focused, so we just integrate with companies who are DRM focused. But of course, in the end, a lot of that security, it's still going on within the player as well. For example, if you look at standard AES encryption, that's completely handled within the player. We have to get all the cookie authentication stuff, all the tokens, interact with the CDNs to make sure that all the credentials are right. And of course, on the other side, you have the full-blown DRM systems where we partner up with companies like BuyDRMs and Verimatrixes and Irdetos. And of course, it depends when you're, from a player perspective, in what the environment is where you're in. For example, in browser environments, everybody here probably knows it, but you have the different DRMs that are applicable in the different browsers, where we just interact with the CDMs within the browser to actually exchange license information and exchange the encrypted content to actually output the actual image. But then again, when you're on mobile platforms, for example, you have a lot more flexibility there. So from a player standpoint, there's quite a lot of things that we need to keep in mind as well.
Okay. Now, another question along this line is, we know inherently, as hard as we work to secure the streams, people are working even harder to figure out how to capture the streams. And I think, Scott, you were the one who brought up the question about what happens when security is breached. Was that the question you had? I had a question here that says, what happens when security does get breached, for example, through screen capture or screen recording? How do we best trace the users which are responsible and plug the leak?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing on that is someone like, even if you have a disgruntled employee, the biggest word thing people are out there is, see, download my screen. Truth is, they get their iPhone out, they start streaming the video screen, typical on there. So that's where the big movement is some place like fingerprinting or watermarking, that you can actually see who's assigned to, and people can go after them then, and legally. But how many people are actually doing that? It's a big issue. And that's what some companies are really trying to figure out is how much threat level can they do before they have to start putting on the watermarking versus other ones that go on there.
Sure. And to the fights, I think, Periscope, Facebook Live, all those questions.
So this is what I was alluding to earlier. I mean, actually, they, the provider I was talking about actually took a very similar approach in the sense that they did watermarking, right, as a way for them to identify, which users, with authenticated users, are getting the stream. But fundamentally, you have to ask, well, okay, so how much are you investing in actually tracking down, who's copied, who's streaming a camera print, if you will, of the fight, where have they posted it, who's responsible. If you get that watermarking, you can identify who it is. You can go, shut down their authentication, right? And you shut off their stream, but you have to resource that, right? You have to actually say, I'm going to go and do this, and it's worth it.
And are we looking at things with watermarking that we know the answer to those questions within 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes? I mean, what's the sort of typical time frame?
So my perspective on this is you can know it very quickly.
Okay.
If you're willing to resource it, right? If you're willing to put people against it who are sitting there managing, watching, monitoring, because, and quite honestly, some of these things are going to show up in places you're never going to look, right? So you're not going to get 100% foolproof security when it comes to that. I think it's different in a corporate environment, right? In a corporate environment, you have a different distribution, and you're still, you still have to discover that someone is stealing, right?
Sure.
to be able to go after them. When it comes to a broader kind of media use case, you're going to look in various obvious places on torrent sites and what have you to see, and on social media to see what people are doing. But you're not going to, get the one guy that's putting it on a private network somewhere.
And that sort of leads to a natural next question. When you talk about resourcing against it, are you looking at thresholds? Like if somebody's sending it out to 50 people versus 500 people, the focus goes to...
Well, I think the key, so what I was pointing out is the resources required to actually discover.
Right.
So once you've discovered, you can shut it off pretty fast.
And you're going to shut it off regardless of whether it's one guy doing it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna see that someone is actually violating what they, the
So there's no fair use model is what you're saying?
No, I think if you're going to do this, it's because you have revenue at stake, right? And if someone is paying, for the view, but then taking it and whether or not they are selling it, right, but if they're broadcasting outside, then, if you're going to enforce it, you have to enforce it regardless. My point was more that you have to measure the ROI.
Sure.
Right? Like, are you focused on providing the best experience for the users that are paying and making sure that that's fine, right? Because there's a lot of, there's a lot of pieces in the chain to provide a great live experience, right? So maybe you should put your resources there versus how many people are actually stealing it and how much revenue leakage do you actually have. Got
it. That makes sense. Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to add, watermarking is one of those things that I know we've been talking about for years, but it's been like I've had watermarking partner companies want to do demos or an initial proof of concepts, and we've just never gotten to it because there's been interest but not enough demand. With 4K content, that's really driving it now, and I think that will make a difference. We've got a few projects going on, and I know I actually don't really understand the difference between watermarking and fingerprinting, but we've got some customers that are working with vendors like Nagra as an example, where they offer that type of service. They've got the monitoring and all of that, and so in that case you pay for it. Same deal, right. Still an ROI question, but I think in the case of our customers, it's more of a liability concern. But yeah, I think over the next few years we'll see more and more in this area.
And in fact, that brings up another liability concern, and this was a question, Jim, you had sent me earlier. What's the role of CDN or the OVP in securing the stream?
Yeah, I guess I won't counter what Peter said. I'll just add our part to it. So in the case of our CDN, and I think public CDNs as well, we've got, I mentioned transforming content earlier. So in order to make it simpler for our customers, we transform content on the fly. So there's still multiple formats of streams that are needed to reach all the different players, and then there's more DRMs. So we take a common source and we just-in-time package it, we just-in-time encrypt it into multiple different DRMs. That solves that problem for customers. And we do that in the CDN. Today we do that at the kind of origin layer of the CDN, but more and more that's being distributed out into the CDN. Another area is in HTTPS delivery. So that's encrypting the content in transit. And again, with our customers, they've got some contractual agreements to do that. More and more browsers are moving to HTTPS only. So the stream from the edge to the consumer must be HTTPS based, so that's another area. And then we do all of the URL signing and authentication, and so we take the exchange from the player or the player brain and handle that part of it as well.
Anybody else want to add on the CDN's role?
I guess Peter kind of alluded to this earlier. There are a lot of different players,
sure.
I shouldn't say players, participants
in
the architecture of a live solution, right? And so I think the reality is whoever is kind of primary or point on putting that solution together needs to ensure that whatever security is being provided, has integrity throughout every piece of it. So I think every layer or every piece along that flow needs to support your content protection strategy. And therefore, the onus does fall on everyone, but whoever kind of is putting the whole solution together needs to ensure that's the case.
I remember hosting a session for iStream Planet at NAB several years ago when the cloud was becoming a thing. There were some guys from FIFA there, and they said, we're not sure we want the cloud because we can't sue the cloud if things go wrong. And so they were looking for who's the technology vendor that was responsible for integrity.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tell you, in putting together some of those fights and things we were talking about, there were a number of different players, but we acted as the primary. So the customer expected us to bear responsibility. Right, and in that case,
the resourcing and making sure that
for making sure that all the partners that were involved actually, supported what they needed, right? And that's not something we always do, but it is a situation in which, I guess the point I'm making here is, every content company that is going to do live streaming where they feel they require it to be secure is going to look for that throat to choke.
Sure.
Right, and so if you're a media organization and you are thinking about that security, first thing I would say is think about what the ROI is associated with it, because there is if there is a requirement, then you're obligated, right? Because there's a liability concern and you hope nothing ever happens. But if you're doing it because, whether or not you're obligated, you want to protect your exclusivity, then you really should do the ROI calculation. And if you're going to require it, then you have to make sure that every piece of that full live solution supports that strategy.
And so sort of a tangential question on that. When we talk about ROI in encrypting the stream versus just putting a gatekeeper in play, and I think, Jim, you may have mentioned where there are obligations for having encryption of the content as it goes through to decode. What kind of bottlenecks do those things create as we go through this process of being able to ideally lower the latency, but maintain the security? And that's not just a question for you, it's a question for anybody in the panel.
Okay, I'll give a quick answer. Really what we focus on is reducing the latency in those things. So more recently, we've put a lot of focus onto really low latency HTTPS. So we can basically do HTTPS delivery at line rate. The encryption process, we do it just in time because it is pretty lightweight. So yeah, there is a little bit of overhead, but if you compare it to today's state, as we were talking about before, with ABR streaming, we're oftentimes 30 seconds behind live. So that's not what people want. People are now pushing more and more to be, very low latency. But in the grand scheme of things, the protection is a very, very small piece of today's current latency state. As that changes, then maybe that'll become more important.
Okay, interesting. Anybody else have a take on that?
Yeah, so we have some customers who want video to be controlled from ingest to delivery.
Okay.
And the whole thing is, you have to do some elements around the transcoding. If you are doing adaptive bitrate, you have to have it there and go the overall completion there and be able to work on all devices. And that's where it gets really tricky and complicated, is to get it there and not add time to your transcoding and overall latency.
And would you say of the companies that want that, how many actually pony up to pay for that extra part of it versus saying I want it, and then you present them with what it's going to cost in terms of latency and additional costs, and they back off from that?
It all depends on the obligations they have. If they have a must carry for their content providers to do this, they're going to pay it. If it's somebody to just pull an idea, I need to have real ultra secure and ultra low latency, and you give them a $100,000 price tag, they're going, I don't need it that bad.
Okay. Yeah. Peter,
Yeah.
you started to.
Yeah, and even then, you still have a lot of different layers. You can do encryption without the full-blown DRM, even as a go-between that already cuts out a lot of the DRM costs and even a little bit of the latency as well. Or indeed, you can go for the full price tag and go for full-blown DRM. But in our experience, that's usually purely an obligation. Otherwise, AES-128 usually already suffices with some form of token authentication.
Okay, well, so that's interesting. So essentially, if they don't have an obligation, the likelihood is they're not going to tend to go for that kind of thing.
That's at least our biggest experience there.
Okay.
You do have some exceptions where people think that their content is really important. it's a question of standpoint usually, if it really is that important. But also from a pure practical standpoint, usually the full-blown DRM approach with really using white fine, play ready, fair play, whatever, it makes a lot of things in the pipeline a lot more tricky. So if you can simplify things there, you're gonna save on cost, and in the end, that's what it comes down to. So
Yeah, I'll just add one comment. I think fundamentally the technical community on the media side will all agree with what Peter said, right? Like, we don't really need, in most cases, anything more than AES 128, right? I think the actual DRM packaging license serving is very much a requirement on, from the legal contractual side. That being said, some of the other things you referenced, right, in terms of authentication and payment gateways and all those other pieces, those are things that I think a lot of media organizations are embracing, right? Especially as they look into and explore hybrid business models, right? In some cases, you have ad-funded models. In other cases, you're putting a paywall, whether it's transactional or subscription-based. And as you get more of the convergence happening, right, between kind of a pure digital and some existing service you're providing, whether it's a pay TV operator or another MSO, or it's a telco of some sort, right? And you can actually try and integrate the data you have on users into whether or not they have certain entitlements or rights. That's when it starts getting pretty complicated. That has nothing to do with actually protecting the content itself. It has more to do with the rights that you're providing to the user.
And especially if you're thinking enterprise role-based, LDAP, that kind of thing, where you can use that to play. Let's talk about a couple of things that have been sort of popular over the years for VOD and how they apply to live. IP blocking, geo blocking, are those things actually deterrents? I mean, I think in the era of Netflix, what I've seen is if somebody really wants to watch Marvel content that's playing in Norway, they'll go get a VPN and watch it. But is geo blocking still practical?
So I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, I think that fundamentally, this is the case for the ROI discussion.
Sure.
There's going to be a distribution curve. There's always going to be those people who will do whatever, they'll pay for a VPN, they'll go out of their way to actually access content that they don't have the rights to access, right? Whether it's just to access it or it's actually to steal the content, put it up on the torrent site. I don't think we're going to change that for some time, right? But if you're Netflix, you care mostly about the bulk of your 100 million subscribers worldwide and what rights. And as long as you're fulfilling that, the challenge is, to the point Jim made earlier, is even Netflix has those obligations. And so what they have to think about then is, okay, we have to put some amount of effort towards detecting whether people are violating this rule.
But is it security theater or is it actual security? I guess that's the question. When you say that they have the obligations, there's the perception of I'm trying to chase them down.
Yeah, so
I'm not asking specifically about Netflix.
No, but it's and I'm speculating about Netflix. I do not have that inside information. But Netflix, just like everybody else, will tell you there is no 100% security, right? Sure. You're not going to get that portion of the distribution curve. You're not going to be able to stop them, right? And there's a limit to what Netflix or anybody else is going to spend to go after that group. Netflix is massive, and they have big obligations, and they have billions of dollars at stake. So they are definitely going to put effort towards it. But I don't think they're motivated to find that those fringe actors. I don't think it's worth their time.
No, I mean, you have those guys, and some people indeed use commercial VPNs, and those are getting detected by those systems usually, as well as all the public proxies that are out there. But if I would want to do something like that, just from a pure practical standpoint, just rent a server somewhere and proxy it through there, and as long as you're the only one using it, nobody else will know, and nobody will even detect it probably. So.
Well, and give the European perspective on this, because I mean, in the States we tend to be very focused on geo-blocking the rest of the world, but in Europe you've got the laws in the Netherlands versus the laws in in Germany, etc.
But that's going to change. I don't know how much is known here about it, but actually in Europe, new legislation is being passed right now that if you have the rights to watch content in, for example, the country that you're from, and if you're on vacation somewhere else within Europe, you have to be able to access that content as well. So
Thank goodness.
they're going to change things there, but yeah, I think it's just going to give more headaches because then you have to detect if this is a user that can access that content.
I wrote an article a couple years ago because I was vacationing in Italy and I had an Amazon account. I wanted to watch my Amazon account over there. I couldn't watch some of the content because it was licensed in the US only. But what really struck me as odd when I contacted Amazon is they also wouldn't let me watch the Amazon created content. And I didn't understand until I went to Turkey a couple months later and I saw Orange is the New Black as an episodic. So they were selling the rights into Turkey in linear. And therefore it negated that. So it'll be quite interesting to see how this plays out in Europe.
I'm pretty interested to see how it will play out as well.
Right, okay. Very good.
Actually, we do have a lot of customers who do geo-blocking, but maybe city level. So let's say you have a concert going on and you don't want people in that city to be watching the video. Then everywhere outside you can. I mean, that's kind of
It's the classic blackout of baseball.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very common one we see a lot in or certain countries. You know, just to have the rights on there or the content might be offensive in certain countries. And those are very common in that aspect to whitelist or blacklist certain countries, cities, or so on. You know, you can always get around it. I can go, use my Verizon MiFi, and I'm not from the area, so I can get the local IP, but my IP is actually from a different region.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Jim, you mentioned just before we came in here about CMAF. Talk a little bit about what you were saying on that, because I think that's interesting, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions.
So I won't assume everybody is aware of what CMAF is, the Common Media Application Format. It's really it's an objective to align the two I'm careful how I don't want to offend anyone, but the two most prevailing ABR formats, HLS and Dash. So it's based on a fragmented MPEG-4 chunk or fragment, and the idea is you store it once in CMAF and you can deliver to those two types of clients. And there's a common encryption capability with that as well. So theoretically, you can encrypt, package, distribute to Dash and HLS clients. Right now, there's a difference in the encryption modes. So there's two different primary modes in AES encryption, CBC and CTR. And on the Apple side, they support CBC. On the Dash side, at least Dash IF, it's CTR. So until that gets resolved, you'll still have encrypted content that's encrypted differently, even though it could be for CMAF. So it's aligning, but you still have some challenges there.
So how does the common encryption scheme that we went through as we went through Dash ratification sort of play into that? Because the whole idea of that, obviously, and it was focused on fragmented MP4 as opposed to transport stream, was to provide those 5 potential DRM solutions. Does that go away? Or does that actually become a subset of
it? Doesn't until this encryption mode issue is resolved.
Okay.
But it is getting resolved, so that's the good news.
Is it?
Well, both Microsoft and Google already announced that they're going to use CBC as well. I think Whitefine already has its first beta versions that actually support it, and Player already has announced that they will support it. So pretty hopeful on that.
Yep.
And was Marlin, was that the open source one from Europe? Is that still in play?
I haven't heard about it in a while.
Less so.
I've seen it on set-top boxes, but I haven't seen
about
it
it.
anywhere else.
Okay, all right. Well, that's true, the HBB TV, because of the standards on that. And then actually one last question before we go to the audience. And I think, Scott, you had brought this up, embed restrictions within browsers. Was that something you had?
Yeah, that was the question I'd let me go and ask. Because we actually do have a lot of customers, they want a specific site they want to be on. Let's say you're doing a car release, you want it here on a few other pages, and you want it nowhere else.
Okay.
So that's a very common one to have.
So that's a whitelisting scenario
Yeah.
as opposed to a black.
Versus, anybody can share anything out there, but you also need to do it in a way that you can almost do domain recognition. So that way, if someone tries to clone your environment, they can't just take your embed code and pop it on their site and they have a working environment.
Okay.
It has to be able to be intelligent enough to say, hey, this is the correct one. It can look at the MAC address and go to deep level down versus just being, oh, this is a fake domain, I can work on here. It needs to be able to detect where it's actually legit and so on.
And does it also work with subdomains as well?
Yeah.
I mean, is that?
It should be able to.
Interesting.
That way you can see the real mapping, because the truth is somebody will try to clone a system, they're not going to have all the proper information. When you put the stuff in there, it should be able to grab it and be able to report and go from there. And then all of a sudden, if it's a duplicate, it shouldn't match up exactly.
Okay. Does Brightcove do embed restrictions with?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the functionality to do all of that. We've actually seen it probably more on the enterprise side of our business as opposed to the media side of our business, which I think is part of what you're referencing. Yeah, because so we have two businesses. We have the media business and we have a enterprise and digital marketing business. And within that, the internal use cases, CEO town halls, all that kind of stuff. They're very, very careful about that, to all the points Scott made earlier.
And is it true that then that whitelisting is more of an enterprise scenario than it is a media and entertainment scenario?
That might be a bit of a generalization because as you've seen, like there are a multitude of use cases, but certainly it's an important topic on the enterprise side.
Okay, interesting.
I guess it really goes back to your brand. If you have certain things out that you need to get your, like, again, our big product release, do you want to own the whole thing, or do you care if people share it?
Sure.
That's, really a marketing decision where you need to have it at, is, I want to own my whole car dealership and the whole rollout versus, anybody can take it, it'd be fine.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the ROI discussion as well, because at the end of the day, if one part of your marketing group wants to do social media where you're trying to make it viral and the other part wants to constrain it in, security is going to be more important to that group versus the group that pushes it out.
Yeah, and whether it's an external facing message or so a product launch, if it's training to enable your sales team on what they need to sell, you don't want to roll that out, right? We have a number of customers, enterprise customers that have large franchise operations. Right, so a lot of the video content that they're doing, they're actually delivering to the franchisees, and it's not meant to be consumer facing.
Right, very good point. All right, going to open it up for questions from the audience. First of all, let me ask a question to the audience. How many people here secure live streams today? And for those of you who do secure live streams, what are the compelling reasons? Are there any different reasons than what we talked about up here with licensing obligations and the like? All right, does anybody have a question? We've got our lovely Vanna White back here. All right, here we go.
So one thing that wasn't mentioned is about how much, talking about the calculus of ROI, how much do companies spend on agencies to send takedown notices and go find the streams on other sites? So, as you mentioned, popular boxing matches. It's amazing now that, Facebook and other platforms have made streaming even easier. Now you have people just streaming, things from their television. The watermark may or may not come through. So any insights or any predictions on trends of how much companies want to spend on sort of just doing takedown efforts versus trying to sort of digitally protect things?
I have an opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say let's talk about it both in terms of transient things like live content as well as long tail content, because I think those two things.
Yeah. So I think to your point about live content. I mean, although you could Facebook live stream even your long form, SVOD content, right? I think that everyone is doing that calculus. There's the complexity, there's the multiple points of failure in the chain. There's a lot of costs that aren't necessarily the economic investment you're going to make in the agencies to do takedown notices or the resources you're going to put against it. When I talk to our customers, I actually, my opinion, right? Sometimes they have obligations, but if they don't, is really think about where you should invest your time and energy, and we can help you protect the stream, and you can work with your teams or agencies to go do takedown notices, and all that is possible. Mm-hmm. But what really matters is the fact that you're not going to control the next new thing that comes out. the next distribution point, social network, whatever other thing, point of distribution that users who want to do these things will have the opportunity to do. So, in the end, this comes down, even with non-transient content, right, VOD assets, like fundamentally, what's that threshold point from a user's perspective that makes it easier for me to just pay for the content and watch it because I get a great experience than, versus it's too expensive and therefore I'm going to actually break the rules and try and distribute the content a different way. I mean, there are the actual pirates out there who are doing this to steal the content and then sell it somehow, right? That's a little bit different. But the general use case of people trying to find the content for free when it's, because they don't want to pay, I think media companies are probably better suited to figure out what am I going to do to provide an experience that's compelling enough to drive that transaction.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because in talking to people, most people will say, I'll try 2 or 3 places that are legitimate, and if I can't find it there, that's when I'm going to go torrent, or that's when I'm going to go find something to watch, which says they want to watch it, they're compelled to watch it, but they can't find an option.
Well, without revealing the numbers, right? The fights that we're talking about, the Pacquiao Horn fight and the McGregor Mayweather fight, right? Those fights in particular this summer in a smaller region of the world unlocked millions of dollars of revenue, right? And so that was revenue that was in addition to the linear streaming rights, right? So this digital pay-per-view was just additive, and the ROI was significant. And I'm sure there are people that found ways to do exactly what you're saying, but did that actually, how much did that actually cost them, right? It wasn't really a cost. It was more about what revenue were they, not taking up. And I would say to them, the people who were, stealing the content or accessing it in a way that was outside, the model, would they have ever paid, right? So did you actually lose money? Right?
Well, and conversely, before Scott says this, I think the ROI model has to include the people who paid for it and couldn't get access to it because the authentication gatekeeper kept them from getting to it.
Yeah, sure.
And then they may have invited their friends over to watch it, and suddenly they've paid the money and they can't watch it, and there's a goodwill issue, there's the issue of the ROI of having to deal with those people as well.
But that cuts across every aspect of,
True.
Does the content play, and is it delivered in a quality fashion, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
I really think what he was mentioning is perfect, but I think a lot of companies are going to look into what are the penalties going to be if they don't go after it. The biggest thing. It's like my contract, am I going to have $100 million? I got to pay fines because you didn't secure it properly, or am I going to charge, $10,000? I think it's really the subject where it comes down to is how much your penalties are, is depending on how much stuff you have to go after.
Fair point.
Yeah, but also something that I was thinking about, because you were mentioning the watermarking. I mean, for live, if you send a takedown notice, it will never be on time.
Right.
So that's not going to matter anyway.
Desist doesn't matter.
You do have, if you're doing fingerprinting or watermarking, then you have probably control over the tokens as well, and you can terminate those tokens and make sure that the stream stops that way. So you can prevent further distribution by that person in the future. But other than that, I think it's indeed, the question is, if the content is accessible in a legal way, which is reasonably priced, it's probably not going to be that much effort to send out takedown notices, because people will just go for the paid content anyway. But you have those cases as well with, I don't know, like Oscar screeners and that kind of things. If you can't get the content in a decent way, then it probably does make sense to put in watermarks and other stuff so that you can send takedown notices and find the guy who did it, because you're gonna.
He's gonna do it again.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna be able to get some money out of it, I think, at least, if you know who did it.
I remember a few years ago there was actually an RFP from this European soccer league, and what they wanted to do, they wanted to stream content, but the part of this RFP is they had to do all stream analysis. So they wanted to look at basically video recognition. So we go through to see anything similar, because even a cell phone taking a picture of something else inside the root image would still be what they're showing. And as long as it was, if you saw anything, it had to be taken down immediately on that network. It was kind of interesting object. I don't think it got very far because so much detailed work and image recognition, but that was a huge RFP they were putting out there. And a lot of people thought they can do it, but then they really look in the real deep of the level of the work to analyze every pixel of that screen to see if it's correct or not. It wasn't cost effective.
And there would be a lot of false positives as well.
Exactly.
And you need to find every image in the world to analyze it. So
That was a big part of the RFP.
All right, we got time for one more question if anybody has back here.
So you've discussed a lot of aspects of securing live streams when it comes to the viewer, to the subscriber. What about securing the contribution feed? Now we have a lot of cloud-based platforms, OVPs, that content is being broadcast into the cloud and from there streamed to the devices. What are the trends or the best practices to secure the contribution feed?
All right. So there's a few options out there. Obviously, a big player out there is Secure Ingest, where you have like companies like Zixi and other ones out there. Obviously, IBM also has Aspera. It's like I mentioned them because I'm an IBM company. They actually have the fast stream, where they can have the connection go through there like that. So there's a lot of different companies are doing that ingest, but it's like, a lot of people also want, was it RTMP-T, I think, or S, I forget which one's secure one. It's out there, but no one's ever used it. It's easy for a server to do it, difficult for an encoder to send that stream out there. And that's the big thing. It seems a lot easier to connect the ingest. But like I was talking to a colleague a couple years ago, this subject came up. Really, if you have a 24/7 stream, it's very easy to know how to hack in. If you're doing random streams and things, you have to have somebody who knows how to intercept the RTMP packets or other, how to know exactly what time you're broadcasting and the whole route to be able to capture that and go through. Yeah, there's probably 100 people in the world that know how to do that. I mean, it's still a risk, but not a substantial risk. Again, if you're going 24/7, it's a lot easier because that stream's always going.
And there's also that scenario where the bandwidth of the contribution feed may be significantly higher than what the average person would have to be able to consume on as well. So, anybody else with thoughts on contribution security? Because I think that definitely is an important issue. That's where you have the potential not just to replicate content that's lower bandwidth, but to replicate that content and start selling it out as essentially digital copies. So.
well, it's often on private networks as well, so that's some inherent security that you have there. I mean, usually that studio-grade content isn't just being distributed to a streaming server over the public internet.
True,
so.
very true. All right, I'd like everyone to help me thank the panelists for being here today.